For 10 years, Julian had meticulously poured his life into Aiden, transforming the frail boy into a formidable fleet admiral. Yet, a single word from Aiden's designated Omega was all it took to reframe that decade of sacrifice as a malicious plot. In the end, Aiden had been the one to personally crush the glands at the nape of his neck. His expression cold as he watched Julian get hauled away to be dumped on a galactic scrap heap. It was only after Julian was gone, after he was dead, that Aiden learned the truth from his physician. The one unique biological signature that could have saved him, the one true antidote to his genetic decline, was Julian's. The very essence of the man he had personally broken. Inside the sterile cryopod, his eyes opened to the familiar white ceiling of a medbay. This time, however, he knew he would not be walking out. The verdict echoed in his mind, a flat, digital pronouncement. Conspiracy to commit high treason against Fleet Admiral Aiden. The sentence was exile to the waste planet Asphodel 9, effective immediately. A phantom throb of agony pulsed from his neck, where Aiden's hand had struck. The pain wasn't merely physical. It was the tearing of a soul, a severing of a connection he had nurtured for a decade. 10 years he had spent masquerading as an unremarkable beta, always at Aiden's side. Whenever Aiden's genetic malady flared, Julian had secretly used his own unique pheromonal essence to stabilize him, a process that felt like trading his own life force, piece by piece. He had never hesitated. He had watched the sickly youth blossom into the youngest fleet admiral in the history of the Commonwealth, a commanding presence in the Galactic Senate and an unstoppable force on the battlefield. He had believed that would be enough. But then Caleb appeared. The designated Omega, with a 99% pheromonal compatibility match, had unraveled Julian's entire world with a few carefully chosen words. He had whispered to the Admiral that Julian was slowly poisoning him with a low-grade, synthetic pheromone. It was a plausible lie. Betas weren't supposed to have pheromones, and the rare few who did produced only the faintest traces. Everyone believed it, including Aiden. He hadn't even asked Julian for an explanation. In front of the entire senior staff, he had seized Julian by the throat, and with one devastating blow to the back of his neck, had ensured he truly would have no pheromones ever again. Now, their engagement ceremony was being broadcast across the entire StarNet. Through the pod's viewport, Julian could see distant holoscreens displaying the event. Caleb was on Aiden's arm, his smile cloyingly sweet. They were a perfect match, the celebrated Admiral and his fated Omega. And Julian? He was just the villain, the treacherous fraud. The transport ship's engines began to hum, a deep vibration that signaled the pull of artificial gravity giving way. This vessel would carry him to Asphodel 9, a dead world saturated with lethal radiation. In his current state, he knew he wouldn't last 3 days. He recalled an old story about a bird that tore out its own heart to feed its beloved. He had thought it foolish then. Now he saw the parallel. Perhaps it was for the best. Death felt like a release. He closed his eyes, letting tears slide from the corners. Goodbye, Aiden. May you and your fated Omega have a long and happy life together. Footsteps approached the hatch, the cadence familiar. It was Marcus, Aiden's second-in-command. 3 years ago, during the battle in the Klaxon Nebula, Marcus had been hit by enemy plasma fire. Julian had shielded him from the second blast with his own body, turning the tide of the engagement. He had thought they were friends. But when Caleb made his accusation, Marcus's voice had been among the loudest condemning him. It didn't matter now. He was here to see him off. Marcus stood there in his immaculate dress uniform, his chest a tapestry of medals. His gaze was filled with a mixture of contempt and disgust as he informed Julian that his very existence made him sick. Julian remained motionless. There was nothing left to say. Marcus stepped closer, looking down at him. He questioned if Julian knew that it was the Admiral's engagement day, suggesting that his timing was a pathetic attempt to make himself a permanent, cancerous memory in the Admiral's life. When Julian offered no reaction, Marcus's anger flared. He drove a fist into Julian's abdomen. The force coiled him into a ball, but he didn't even grant Marcus the satisfaction of a groan. Pain had become a mundane sensation. Still playing dead, Marcus sneered, pulling a high-yield protein pack from his tunic. He called it a final act of mercy from the Admiral, so that Julian wouldn't do him the disservice of dying en route and sullying his name. He tossed the pack, and it bounced off Julian's face. As the pack rolled across the floor, Julian found himself thinking of a younger Marcus, fresh out of the academy, nervous before his first deployment. He remembered the man's words from a medbay long ago, a simple thank you for saving my life. Now, that same man wished him a slow and agonizing death. The human heart was a strange and fickle thing. With immense effort, Julian lifted his head. He asked Marcus to do him a favor. He wanted a lethal dose of a metabolic inducer. He promised to die quietly. Marcus was momentarily stunned. Then his face twisted into a mask of rage. He accused Julian of wanting to curse the Admiral with his death, calling him a venomous snake, malicious to the very end. He kicked Julian in the chest, the impact slamming him against the bulkhead. The shattered glands in his neck screamed with fresh agony, and he tasted blood. Marcus grabbed him by the hair, dragging him toward the ship's airlock. He snarled that death was too easy. Julian would rot on Asphodel 9 and remember that he had earned every moment of it. Suddenly, the airlock door was wrenched open from the outside with a shriek of tortured metal. A familiar figure stood silhouetted against the corridor lights, his formal Admiral's uniform seeming to absorb the light. It was Aiden. He shouldn't be here. He should be at his wedding. A flicker of panic crossed Marcus's face, fearing a reprimand. But he didn't know his Admiral well enough. Aiden was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly pragmatic. He wouldn't waste time on a broken man. Aiden simply waved Marcus away. He looked down at Julian, those eyes that had once made his heart race now as cold and empty as deep space. He told him to get up, to stop the theatrics. Julian almost laughed. Theatrics? He barely had the strength to breathe, let alone perform. His silence seemed to confirm some dark suspicion in Aiden's mind. He strode forward, his fingers digging brutally into Julian's jaw, forcing his head up. He demanded to know what Julian had done, revealing that Caleb had collapsed at the ceremony. He accused him of poisoning his Omega. Who told you that? Julian rasped. Caleb? His defiance ignited Aiden's fury. Julian looked at the face contorted with rage and felt a profound sense of alienation. Was this truly the man he had protected for 10 years? Or had he never known him at all? Aiden spoke of Caleb's 99% compatibility, the only thing that could truly cure his condition. He accused Julian of harming him for a decade with his substandard pheromones, and now trying to ruin his entire life. Substandard. The word was a dull knife, twisting in his chest. Julian laughed, a ragged, tearing sound that brought up a froth of blood and tears. Substandard? He choked out, summoning every last reserve of his strength into a final, desperate roar. Aiden, you magnificent fool! Aiden was so taken aback by the sudden fury that his grip slackened. Go ask your chief medical officer, Julian gasped, his voice raw. Ask him about the Crimson Tide incident 5 years ago. If a high-purity Enigma hadn't used their own essence to forcibly rewrite your genetic sequence, you'd be nothing but a pile of ash in a jar right now. He watched the emotions shift across Aiden's face. Confusion, doubt, dawning horror. A grim satisfaction bloomed in Julian's chest. He was about to reveal the secret he had guarded for a decade when blaring alarms screamed through the ship. An automated voice announced a pirate attack and called all personnel to emergency stations. The shockwave from a nearby explosion rocked the vessel, and the ship tilted violently. Julian's weakened body was thrown against the far wall. As gravity failed, he saw Aiden instinctively reach for him, a desperate, aborted gesture. But it was too late. A section of the hull ruptured, and the explosive decompression snatched Julian, pulling him out into the silent, star-dusted darkness. In the last moment before the void took him, he saw the anguish on Aiden's face. He smiled at him, a true smile of liberation. Goodbye, Aiden. This time for good. He thought he was dead, or perhaps he had hoped for it. When consciousness returned, it was heralded by a protest from every cell in his body. The ceiling above was a strange patchwork of salvaged alloy plates, with faint light seeping through the cracks. "You're awake." A low voice came from his side. He turned his head with difficulty. A rugged man was methodically cleaning a plasma rifle. He had broad shoulders, a narrow waist, and the hard lines of muscle were visible beneath his simple fatigues. His jaw was sharp, marked by a thin, pale scar. He was an alpha, radiating a powerful, though tightly controlled, pheromonal signature. "Who are you?" Julian's voice was a dry croak. "Jax," the man answered simply, not looking up. Julian tried to sit, but a blinding wave of pain nearly made him pass out again. Jax finally glanced over. "Don't move. Your glands were destroyed. The injury is severe." He set the rifle aside and came over, his hands rough but surprisingly gentle as he helped Julian lie back down. "Why did you save me?" Julian asked. Jax was silent for a moment before giving a clipped reply. "Didn't sit right with me." Julian managed a bitter smile. He wasn't sure what Jax meant, whether it was seeing him with destroyed glands or just watching him lie there waiting to die. "My name is Julian." Jax nodded, asking no questions about his past or how he had ended up drifting in space. He just walked to a corner of the room and returned with a steaming bowl of broth. "Drink this. You need your strength." The savory aroma made his stomach cramp violently. How long had it been since he'd eaten a real meal? Since Caleb's arrival, Aiden had grown distant. Julian had been producing so much of his essence to keep the Admiral stable that he'd often skipped his own nutrient rations. Seeing him hesitate, Jax frowned. "Too hot?" "No." Julian took the bowl, sipping the liquid carefully. It was rich and flavorful, with the distinct gamey taste of some wild creature. Jax sat quietly nearby, observing him from the corner of his eye. "What kind of meat is this?" he asked. "Cinder lizard. Native to this planet," Jax explained. "Low radiation content. Good for recovery." Julian nodded, continuing to drink. Jax went back to cleaning his rifle. The shelter was quiet, filled only by the sound of their breathing and the soft scrape of metal on metal. It was a peacefulness Julian hadn't known in years. Here, no one questioned who he was. No one accused him of crimes he didn't commit. No one could hurt him. He could simply lie here and heal. "You live here alone?" he asked. "Yeah," Jax replied. 3 years now. 3 years. An alpha, living alone on a waste planet for 3 years. He wondered what his story was but quickly dismissed the thought. Everyone had secrets, just as he had hidden his Enigma status. Since Jax didn't pry into his past, he wouldn't pry into his. That felt right. In another part of the galaxy, Aiden's genetic malady flared again, worse than ever before. "Admiral, you're awake." The chief medical officer rushed to his bedside. "Your injuries are extensive. We need to administer the suppressant immediately." Aiden tried to speak, but the coppery taste of blood filled his mouth. "Julian," he managed to force out. The physician's expression became clouded. "Admiral, Mr. Julian, is he dead?" Aiden's voice was frail. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "We found the wreckage near Asphodel 9. It's unlikely he survived." Aiden closed his eyes. The ache in his chest was no longer just the disease. It was a vast, crushing emptiness. "Give me the suppressant," he ordered. The doctor prepared the injection, but the moment the fluid entered Aiden's veins, his body began to convulse violently instead of stabilizing. "What's happening?" Aiden gritted out, his knuckles white as he gripped the bed frame. The doctor, sweating profusely, scanned the frantic readouts. "The suppressant isn't working. Your genetic structure is rapidly degrading. We need a more potent pheromonal source." "Then get Caleb," Aiden roared. "His compatibility is 99%. He has to." "It's useless," the doctor finally shouted, his professionalism cracking. "Caleb's pheromones have never had any effect on your condition." Aiden froze. "What did you say?" "I said his pheromones are useless," the doctor repeated, his eyes red with unshed tears. "For 10 years, it was never about a 99% match." "Then what was it?" Aiden felt a dizzying vertigo. "It was Julian," the doctor whispered, his voice breaking. "He's an enigma, the rarest designation in the universe. Every single dose of medicine you've received for the last decade was his own essence, extracted directly from his body." The words struck Aiden like a physical blow. He stared, uncomprehending. He had to extract massive amounts every month. The doctor continued, his voice choked with emotion. "His body was failing day by day, but you never noticed. Do you have any idea what it means for an enigma to extract their core essence? It's trading their life for someone else's." A flood of memories washed over Aiden. Julian, always appearing at his side the moment his illness flared, always with the perfect remedy. Julian, often pale and weak, an exhaustion Aiden had always dismissed. The Crimson Tide incident 5 years ago, when his genetic structure had been on the brink of total collapse and every doctor had given him 3 days to live. He now understood it was Julian, in a desperate act of self-sacrifice, who had transfused his essence for 72 hours straight, pulling him back from the precipice of death. Aiden remembered. Julian had been unconscious for a month after that, his hair turning prematurely silver at the temples. And what had Aiden done when he awoke? His first question, he recalled with sickening clarity, was whether their supply of medicine was still sufficient. He had been confused by the profound sadness in Julian's eyes at that moment. The doctor looked at Aiden with undisguised disappointment. "Now, without his essence, your condition will cascade uncontrollably. You have a month at most. Nothing can save you." Aiden lurched up, ignoring the fire in his veins, and grabbed the doctor's coat. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Why?" The doctor gave a bitter laugh. "I tried. I hinted at it a dozen times. But you never listened. And besides, he made me promise not to. He said if you knew the truth, you'd feel indebted to him, and he didn't want you to carry that burden." Aiden's hands fell away. He collapsed back onto the bed, a man hollowed out. Jax was an interesting man. He was taciturn, but Julian never felt ignored. He modified Julian's cot 3 times, first adding a radiation shielding mesh, then replacing the filling with softer material, and finally attaching a small articulated arm to help him sit up. He never announced the changes, simply doing them. Watching his calloused fingers carefully adjust the joints of the support arm, Julian felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. Whatever happened, survival is what matters. Jax handed him a plasma pistol. It was well maintained, the metal cool and solid in his hand. Julian took it. For 10 years, he had never once fought for himself. Seeing his inexperience, Jax began to teach him, adjusting his grip, his stance. Squeezed the trigger. No hesitación. Kindness is a liability out here. When Julian finally hit a distant target, Jax offered a rare, small smile. Not bad. Better than I expected. That night, they sat by a fire. Jax was dressing their kill from the day's hunt while Julian cleaned the pistol. The firelight danced across Jax's focused profile. "What did you do before this?" Julian asked. "Mercenary," he answered, then added, "Still am." "Then why save me?" Jax's hands paused for a fraction of a second. "No reason." When Aiden's fleet finally located the wreckage of the transport ship in the asteroid belt of Asphodel 9, Julian had been dead for 3 months. That was the official story, at least. The corpse they found, clad in a prisoner's uniform identical to his, had its DNA ravaged beyond recognition by cosmic rays. It didn't matter. Besides Aiden, no one cared about the fate of a traitor. The HoloNets reported that Aiden had clung to the charred body and wept for 3 days and nights, the broadcast carrying the spectacle galaxy-wide. It was the ultimate irony. He had personally condemned Julian to death, and now he was performing his grief for an audience of billions over the body of a stranger. After that, the galaxy whispered that Admiral Aiden had gone mad. He mobilized every resource at his command, searching for any trace of Julian while simultaneously exacting a terrible vengeance on those who had wronged him. Caleb was first. The once cherished Omega, who had perfected an image of harmless innocence, was now on his knees in Aiden's office, trembling. Aiden threw dossier after dossier onto the desk in front of him. He laid out the evidence of how Caleb had not only framed Julian, but had also conspired with Aiden's political enemies, leaking his travel coordinates to pirates. He told him he knew everything, that his petty schemes were transparent. Caleb's face was ashen as he denied it, begging Aiden to listen. Aiden laughed coldly, asking what there was to explain, how he had orchestrated Julian's death. The reports later stated that Aiden had Caleb's glands surgically removed and sold him to the lowest-tier indentured servant markets. The exalted, fated Omega was now worth less than the most common beta. Next was Marcus. His once loyal lieutenant sobbed uncontrollably at his court-martial, claiming he had been blinded by lies when he'd beaten Julian. Aiden sat in the gallery, his face an emotionless mask. At the end, he submitted a single directive. Marcus was to be stripped of his rank and exiled to the penal colony on K-78, a planet with radiation levels even higher than Asphodel. "It's a good place for a long repentance," Aiden's voice had stated through the court speaker, devoid of any inflection. Everyone knew a sentence to K-78 was a death sentence. The signal on the small screen in their shelter fizzled out. Julian was helping Jax recalibrate the base's atmospheric shields when the news came through. Jax paused his work. "Your ex is making a lot of noise." Julian's hands faltered for a moment. Then he resumed his task. "Yeah. Satisfying?" Jax asked. He looked up. Satisfying? He didn't know. Watching the people who had ruined him be ruined in turn didn't bring the vindication he might have expected. It felt distant, like watching a drama through a frosted pane of glass. The spectacle belonged to them, not him. "I don't really feel anything," he said honestly. "It's like watching a very old movie." Jax nodded and said no more. He passed Julian a freshly oiled rifle. Take this. Sandstorm's coming tonight. We need to reinforce the hunting traps. The cool, heavy weight of the weapon in his hands felt real. It grounded him, pushing away the hazy, distant memories of betrayal and pain. That universe was turning itself inside out for another man's grief. His universe was about the coming sandstorm, and whether the sand lizard in their trap was big enough for 2 days' meals. Jax looked at him then, and asked a question that seemed to come from nowhere. "Julian is dead," he stated. "What do you want to be called now?" "Ash," he replied. "Ashes to ashes." 3 years passed. Life on the waste planet had become his new normal. Jax had somehow managed to repair some of the function in his damaged glands. While he could no longer produce the potent, life-altering essence of his past, he could generate enough for self-defense. Together, they had transformed the dilapidated underground shelter into something resembling a home. Julian had even cultivated a small patch next to the nutrient paste synthesizer, where a mutated cactus grew, sprouting small, vibrant blue flowers. Jax named it Steve and watered it with nutrient solution every day without fail. "You're nicer to him than you are to me," Julian complained once. Without looking up from his work, Jax grunted, "He's less trouble." "Fine. Point taken." One day, Jax returned from a scavenging run. Instead of his usual ritual of checking on Steve, he tossed a portable datapad at Julian. "You should see this." His tone was strange. The screen lit up with a galaxy-wide headline: "Fleet Admiral Aiden, deceased on Asphodel 9. Julian's hand, which had been measuring a genetic stimulant, froze in mid-air. After a few seconds, he continued his work. "I thought he died 3 years ago." Surprised he lasted this long. Jax frowned at him. "Just, oh? What else?" Julian injected the stimulant into a seed culture, watching it glow with a faint green light. "Should I play a celebratory anthem for him?" Jax pulled up the video report. The man on the screen was a ghost. The Admiral's uniform that had once looked so imposing now hung loosely on a skeletal frame. His hair was completely white, his eyes sunken and hollow as he knelt before a solitary grave. Julian knew that grave. It was the fake one Aiden had built for him. The reporter stated that Aiden had kept a vigil there for 3 years, refusing all medical treatment, food, and communication. When his family had tried to remove him by force, he had lashed out with a psychic burst that had incapacitated several alphas. No one had dared approach him since. The report ended with interviews of high-ranking officials, all lamenting the tragedy. The Admiral sought to atone with his life, one said somberly. "Such devotion is a rare and terrible thing." Looking at their sanctimonious faces, Julian started to laugh. Atonement? Did Aiden truly believe that dying at his fake grave could erase the agony of his destroyed glands or the terror of being left for dead in the void? It was pathetically naive. Aiden's death had nothing to do with him. A month later, they were besieged by the planet's most feared predator, radwolves. The beasts were 3 meters tall, their bodies covered in bony spurs. "Stay inside. Don't come out," Jax ordered, shoving the last plasma rifle into Julian's hands before grabbing a vibroaxe and charging out. Through the reinforced viewport, Julian watched him carve a path through the pack. But there were too many of them. A wolf attacked from his blind spot, its claws tearing through the armor on his left arm. Julian watched, his heart seizing, as Jax staggered and fell. He couldn't die. Not him. Not the one person in the universe who would name a cactus Steve. Who would silently bring him a cup of warm milk after a nightmare. Who had shown him by his actions alone that he belonged here. He was not allowed to die. Julian smashed the emergency lock on the door and ran out. The wolves were closing in on the fallen Jax. He took a deep breath and released the pheromones that had lain dormant within him for 3 years. The absolute, dominant scent of an enigma washed over the battlefield. Instantly, every frenzied beast froze as if hit by a stun wave. They dropped to the ground, bodies trembling, whining in terror. Jax looked up, his blood-streaked face a mask of shock. "You, shut up." Julian scrambled to his side, tearing a strip from his own shirt to press against the wound, which was deep enough to show bone. His own pheromones enveloped Jax, soothing his distressed alpha signature. But the bleeding wouldn't stop. His life was draining away. Watching the light fade from his eyes, Julian made a decision he never thought he would make again. He leaned down and bit down hard on the back of Jax's neck, right through the collar of his fatigues. It was a temporary mark, but one forged with absolute, possessive intent. Jax's body went rigid, his eyes flying wide. He felt it, a searing, unbreakable connection snapping into place between them. "Ash," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. This man of iron, who faced down death without flinching, had tears welling in his eyes. He wrapped his good arm around Julian, holding him tight. I thought you'd never trust anyone again." He buried his face in Julian's neck, his voice muffled. Julian gently patted his back. "I thought so too," he said softly. "But you're different. You never asked about my past, never made me prove anything, never wanted anything from me. You were just here. That was enough." They held each other there, surrounded by the corpses of fallen wolves, under the unchanging, star-filled sky of the waste planet. Dragging a 6'4", heavily injured alpha back to the base nearly exhausted Julian's remaining strength. An injured Jax, it turned out, was surprisingly petulant and the worst patient he had ever encountered. "This ointment is too cold," he grumbled, eyeing the regenerative gel in Julian's hand. Julian expressionlessly applied it to the gash. "It's warmer than it would be if you were a corpse." That shut him up for a moment, but he soon found something else to complain about. "The water's too hot." Julian set the cup down firmly beside him. "Then wait for it to cool to your preferred temperature." Jax looked at him, then asked, seemingly out of nowhere, "Did you used to take care of Aiden like this?" Julian's movements stilled. The only sound was the low hum of the life support systems. "It was different," he finally said. "Taking care of him was my job." He met Jax's gaze, speaking each word with deliberate clarity. "Taking care of you is something I want to do." Jax's ears turned a shade of crimson visible even in the dim light. He whipped his head around to stare at the wall, muttering something that sounded suspiciously like "oh." Julian smirked. So much for the tough mercenary. The days of recovery were slow. They moved Steve the cactus to the bedside table, and Jax spent more time staring at it than he did at Julian. "What are you looking at it for?" Julian finally asked. "Seeing if your pheromones scared it so much it won't bloom," he replied, completely serious. The man's logic was sometimes a complete mystery. Sometimes Julian thought of his former self, the man who had pretended to be a beta, who had believed that love was synonymous with sacrifice. It was laughably foolish. Love wasn't about endless giving or one-sided protection. It was about two people building something together, turning a wrecked-out shelter into a place that could be called home. "Hey." Jax nudged his arm, then touched the back of his own neck awkwardly. "That mark, when does it fade?" "It's temporary. A month or so," Julian said, deciding to tease him. "Why? Getting tired of it?" "No," he retorted immediately, his voice rising like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. "Just asking." Seeing him so flustered was endlessly amusing. "Don't worry," Julian said, leaning closer and lowering his voice. "If you're good, I might consider renewing your subscription, or maybe even upgrading you to a lifetime membership." Jax froze completely, a blush creeping up from his neck to his hairline, his entire face turning a brilliant shade of red. He looked like he was about to spontaneously combust.